An Apache? Please! She can't even lift the helmet! The laughter echoed across the tarmac as a young woman approached the cockpit, skeptical eyes, dismissive head shakes. She remained silent through it all. But when the wind lifted her hair, revealing a small special ops tattoo at the base of her neck, the entire airfield went dead quiet. Who was she, and why did one faded? Mark make a battle-hardened colonel freeze in his tracks, like he'd seen a ghost. Lana Briggs was 29 years old and officially just a helicopter mechanic for the past 3 years. She'd worked maintenance at Redstone Army Base, her days spent with wrenches and engine diagnostics rather than flight controls and tactical maneuvers to her colleagues. She was simply the pretty mechanic competent enough with repairs, but hardly the type you'd trust with a multi-million-dollar attack helicopter. They had no idea who she really was. What they saw was a quiet woman who kept to herself, who preferred coveralls to uniforms, who seemed more comfortable under an aircraft than inside one. What they didn't know was that Lana held both civilian and military pilot licenses with flight hours that would impress most career aviators. More importantly, they didn't know about the 5 years she'd spent with a unit so classified that its very existence was debated in military circles. The only evidence of that life was a small tattoo at the base of her neck, usually hidden beneath her long hair, a silver serpent coiled around a torch. The insignia of Phantom Talon, the special operations flight unit that handled missions in places that didn't appear on any official map. But those days were over, had been over since the incident during Operation Silent Arrow, when everything went wrong, and the survivors were quietly reassigned or discharged when heroes became liabilities and classified operations became political embarrassments. Now Lana fixed helicopters instead of flying them. She maintained Apaches instead of piloting them into combat zones where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Today was different, though. Personnel shortages had forced the base commander to authorize qualified maintenance technicians to participate in routine flight checks. It was supposed to be simple basic maneuver systems, verification, nothing that required advanced combat training. Lana had volunteered immediately. She stood now at the edge of the flight line, watching the massive Apache helicopter gleam in the desert sun. The AH-64 was a Predator made manifest, sleek, deadly beautiful, in the way that only purpose-built weapons could be. She'd flown aircraft like this through hostile airspace, had trusted her life to their armor, and firepower had used their capabilities to extract teammates from situations that military planners had written off as impossible. But to the pilots and technicians gathering around the aircraft, she was just another mechanic hoping to play pilot for an afternoon. "You sure about this?" Briggs asked Sergeant Martinez. The senior maintenance supervisor. Simulation time is different from actual flight hours. "I have my licenses," Lana replied quietly, adjusting the flight helmet under her arm. "Civilian licenses," someone corrected with a smirk. "Flying a Cessna is a little different from handling an Apache, more laughter, more assumptions." The kind of casual dismissal that Lana had learned to accept as part of her new identity, better to be underestimated than to answer questions about capabilities that were supposed to remain buried in classified files. She approached the aircraft with movements that were too confident, too familiar for someone who supposedly had limited helicopter experience. Her hand touched the armored hull with the gentle reverence of someone greeting an old friend with the other mechanics and pilots. It was just a machine with Lana. It was a reunion as she prepared for her pre-flight inspection. Her long hair shifted in the desert breeze, exposing just a hint of the tattoo that would change everything. The silver serpent that marked her as something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But for now, she was still just a mechanic hoping to prove she could handle what the men assumed was beyond her capabilities. That assumption was about to be shattered in the most dramatic way possible. The group of pilots and technicians gathered around the Apache like spectators at a sideshow, their expressions mixing amusement with skepticism as Lana approached the cockpit. "Don't let your hair get tangled in the controls," one pilot called out, earning chuckles from the crowd. "Maybe we should get her a booster seat," another added, Make sure she can reach the pedals. Lana tightened her helmet strap and said nothing. She'd heard variations of these jokes for 3 years, had learned that silence was her best weapon, because if she spoke up, if she told them about the missions that still appeared in her dreams, about the teammates who hadn't made it home, about the nights, she'd flown through enemy fire to extract soldiers from impossible situations. They'd never believe her anyway. The mockery continued as she performed her pre-flight inspection with systematic precision that spoke of extensive training. Her hands moved over controls and switches with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this routine hundreds of times under conditions far more stressful than a training exercise. "Look at her. Go," someone whispered mockingly. "Thinks she knows what all those buttons do." But Captain Mike Torres, one of the more experienced Apache pilots, watched with growing interest. There was something about the way Lana moved around the aircraft, the confidence of her inspection routine, the familiarity with systems that took most pilots months to master. Briggs. He called out, "Where'd you get your helicopter training flight school?" She replied simply, not elaborating on which flight school or what kind of training she'd received there. The answer satisfied no one flight school could mean anything from civilian certification to advanced military instruction, and Lana's deliberate vagueness only fueled more speculation about whether she was qualified for what she was attempting. "She's stalling," someone muttered, "probably hoping someone will step in and call this off before she embarrasses herself." Lana heard the comment, but didn't react. She'd learned to compartmentalize criticism, to let doubt and dismissal wash over her like background noise. The memories of her real training were too sharp, too painful to risk exposing to people who would never understand what they meant. Those memories lived in classified files and sealed mission reports in the silver serpent tattoo, hidden beneath her hair in the reflexes and instincts that had kept her alive through operations that officially never happened. The desert wind picked up blowing sand across the tarmac and lifting Lana's long hair away from her neck for just a moment. The tattoo was visible, a small mark that most people would dismiss as decorative art, but not everyone was looking at it with untrained eyes. Colonel James Cole had been walking across the flight line when he'd noticed the commotion around the Apache. As the base commander, he took interest in any unusual activity involving his aircraft and personnel. He'd planned to observe the training exercise from a distance, maybe offer some guidance if needed. Then he saw the tattoo. Cole stopped walking so abruptly that his aide nearly collided with him. His face went pale as he processed what he was seeing, his mind racing through memories and classified briefings that he'd thought were sealed forever. The silver serpent coiled around a torch. The mark of Phantom Talon. Cole knew that insignia, because he'd been the one who'd signed the orders to close the unit's files after Operation Silent Arrow. He'd been the one who'd reviewed the casualty reports and survivor statements. He'd been the one who'd made the decision to classify the entire operation above most clearance levels because the political ramifications were too dangerous to risk exposure, and according to those files, everyone from Phantom Talon was either dead or had been relocated with new identities so complete that their previous service was erased from all accessible records. Everyone except one pilot who'd been listed as missing, presumed dead. After the operation went sideways, a young female aviator whose body had never been recovered from the crash site, Lana Briggs. Cole's hand shook slightly as he pulled out his phone and accessed the secure database that contained information about Operation Silent Arrow. The photograph in the classified file matched the woman standing beside his Apache helicopter, preparing to fly as if nothing had changed since her supposed death 5 years ago. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, barely audible. "She's alive." Etta Canum. The mechanics and pilots continued their commentary, unaware that their commander had just witnessed what he thought was impossible. They saw a maintenance worker trying to prove herself. Cole saw a ghost returning from a classified grave. The laughter had stopped. The mockery had vanished because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It just needs to be seen, etched in skin and hidden beneath hair, as a reminder that some people carry more than their appearance suggests. Have you ever watched someone being underestimated only to realize they were hiding something extraordinary? What happens when the mask finally slips and reveals who they really are underneath? The laughter died. The judgments fell silent because the cover of a mechanic was just stripped away, revealing the heart of a warrior they would never dare to underestimate. Have you ever seen someone looked down on because of their job or their appearance? What happens when they spectacularly prove everyone wrong? Comment cover, if you believe the most humble people hide the most extraordinary strength. Colonel Cole strode across the tarmac with the authority of someone who just realized he was witnessing the impossible. The crowd of spectators parted as he approached, their casual banter dying away when they recognized the base commander's expression. This wasn't the face of someone coming to observe a routine training exercise. This was the face of someone who just seen a ghost. Everyone stepped back. Cole ordered, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't invite questions. The pilots and mechanics exchanged confused glances, but complied, creating a circle of space around Lana and the Apache. She looked up from her pre-flight checks, meeting Cole's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who'd been expecting this moment for 3 years. "Ma'am," Cole said formally, "I need you to state your name and unit affiliation." The question hung in the desert air like a challenge around them. The gathered personnel waited for an answer that would either validate their skepticism or shatter everything they thought they knew about the quiet mechanic. Lana straightened to attention, her posture shifting from civilian maintenance worker to something else entirely. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp precision of someone who'd given briefings in secure facilities to people with clearances above most pay grades. "Lana Briggs, Phantom Talon Squadron, call sign Silver." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Most of them had never heard of Phantom Talon, but the few senior officers present recognized the name from whispered conversations and classified briefings. The Ghost Squadron, the unit that handled operations so secret that their existence was officially denied. Captain Torres stepped forward, his skepticism replaced by something approaching awe. "Phantom Talon, but that unit was... everyone thought we were all dead." Lana finished quietly. That was the point. Cole nodded slowly, pieces of a classified puzzle falling into place. Operation Silent Arrow. "5 years ago, you were listed as Kia. I was listed as Convenient." Lana replied, her voice carrying a bitter edge that spoke of betrayals and political calculations that had nothing to do with military service. Someone needed to take responsibility when the mission went public. Dead pilots can't testify before congressional committees. The admission sent a chill through the assembled personnel. They were witnessing something that existed in the classified spaces between official history and buried truth. A conversation about operations that didn't appear in any public record, about sacrifices that were never acknowledged, about heroes who were erased when their success became politically inconvenient. "The aircraft you were flying," Cole continued, "was reported destroyed. No survivors. The aircraft was destroyed." Lana confirmed. "I wasn't in it." When it happened, she turned back to the Apache, her hands moving over the controls with the fluid precision of someone who'd once trusted her life to similar machines. The helicopter wasn't just equipment to her. It was a reunion with a part of herself that she'd been forced to abandon. "I've been working maintenance for 3 years," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd traded a cockpit for a toolbox, who'd accepted invisibility in exchange for survival, keeping these birds in the air for pilots who think they know what real flying looks like. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the desert wind seemed to pause, as if the entire base was holding its breath while watching the resurrection of someone who was supposed to be dead. Cole made a decision that would have ramifications far beyond the training exercise. "Cancel the simulation," he ordered. "Clear the airspace. I want her in the actual aircraft. Sir Captain Torres protested. Protocol requires additional verification before I'm the verification." Cole interrupted his voice, carrying the authority of someone who'd read classified files and signed orders that had shaped military history. "If she's Phantom Talon, she can fly anything we put in front of her. If she's not—" He paused, looking at Lana with the respect reserved for legends. "Well, we'll find out pretty quickly." Lana climbed into the Apache's cockpit with movements that were too smooth, too automatic for someone who supposedly had limited helicopter experience. Her hands found controls without looking. Her body settled into the pilot's seat with the natural grace of someone coming home after a long exile. The startup sequence was flawless engine ignition systems check rotor engagement, each step performed with a kind of precision that took years to develop and couldn't be faked under pressure as the Apache lifted off the tarmac. Something extraordinary happened. The machine that had seemed powerful but mechanical in other hands became something else entirely under Lana's control. It moved with fluid, grace responding to input so subtle they were almost invisible. Performing maneuvers that exceeded the capabilities most pilots could achieve, she didn't fly the Apache. She danced with it for 15 minutes. Lana put the aircraft through a demonstration that left the watching crowd speechless. Combat maneuvers that existed only in classified training manuals, precision flying that bordered on artistry, the kind of performance that separated competent pilots from legends. When she brought the Apache down for a landing so gentle that the skids kissed the tarmac without so much as a vibration, the entire flight line erupted in applause. Not polite acknowledgement, but genuine appreciation for witnessing something extraordinary. As the rotors spun down, Lana remained in the cockpit for a moment, her hands resting on controls that had welcomed her back like old friends through the canopy. She could see faces that had transformed from skepticism to respect, from mockery to awe. Colonel Cole approached the aircraft as she climbed down, his expression mixing amazement with something that might have been embarrassment about assumptions that had kept a legend working in maintenance for 3 years that was flying, that exceeded every parameter we have for this aircraft, he said quietly. "Where did you learn to do that?" Lana removed her helmet, her hair falling back to conceal the tattoo that had started everything. "Same place I learned that some battles are worth fighting, even when victory costs everything you have." She handed him the helmet and walked toward the hangar, leaving behind a group of people who would never again assume that quiet confidence meant limited capability behind her. The Apache sat silent on the tarmac, but the reverberations of what they'd witnessed would echo through Redstone Army Base for years to come. The ghost had returned from the dead, and everyone had seen her fly. The story of Lana Briggs spread through Redstone Army Base like wildfire through dry grass. Within hours, every pilot, mechanic, and officer on the installation had heard some version of what had happened on the flight line. The details varied, with each telling some said she'd performed aerobatics that defied physics. Others claimed she'd been flying classified missions all along. But the core truth remained constant. Phantom Talon had returned from the dead. The pilots and mechanics who'd made jokes about booster seats and helmet weights found themselves the subjects of base-wide discussion. Not disciplinary action, Lana had specifically requested that none be taken, but the kind of attention that made people examine their assumptions about who deserve respect, and why I keep thinking about how she just took it all. Captain Torres confided to his squadron leader weeks later. Every joke, every dismissive comment, she never said a word in her own defense, like she was protecting something more important than her ego. Colonel Cole had moved quickly to formalize Lana's return to flight status. The paperwork was complex. Officially resurrecting someone who'd been declared dead required approvals from levels of command that most people didn't know existed. But within a week, she was back on active flying duty with full clearance for combat operations. The basis of Apache Squadron had gained more than just another pilot. They'd gained an instructor whose experience exceeded anything their training manuals could provide. Lana began working with younger aviators, teaching techniques that couldn't be learned from simulators or classroom instruction. "Ma'am," one lieutenant asked during a training session, "how do you make the aircraft respond like that? It's like it becomes part of you." Lana adjusted his grip on the controls while considering how to explain something that was part instinct, part experience, and part understanding, that came from flying in situations where mechanical failure meant certain death fear is information. She said, finally, the aircraft will tell you everything you need to know if you learn to listen, but you have to stop thinking of it as a machine and start thinking of it as a partner. The honesty was refreshing to pilots who'd been trained on procedures and protocols, rather than the intuitive flying that separated competent aviators from legends. Lana's approach was different. Personal emotional, focused on building a relationship with the aircraft, rather than simply operating it. Word of her teaching methods spread beyond Redstone. Senior pilots from other installations began requesting transfers to observe her techniques. Military aviation schools sent instructors to document innovations that were improving pilot performance across multiple squadrons. A small ceremony took place 6 months after her return to active duty. Colonel Cole personally reinstated the Phantom Talon insignia on the base's wall of honor, acknowledging the unit's contributions to national security in the only way that classification levels would allow. This symbol represents more than just one squadron. He told the assembled personnel it represents all the quiet professionals who serve without recognition, who carry their achievements like hidden tattoos, visible only to those who understand their significance. Lana stood at attention during the ceremony, but said nothing about her role in the unit's history. She'd learned that some honors were more powerful when they remained mysterious, that respect earned through demonstrated confidence was worth more than recognition demanded through official channels. The mechanics and pilots she now flew alongside treated her with a quiet deference reserved for someone who'd proven their worth in the most definitive way possible. They'd witnessed her resurrection, had seen her transform from underestimated maintenance worker to legendary aviator in the space of a single flight. But perhaps most importantly, they'd learned that confidence often hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself to people wise enough to recognize it. When it appears, some marks aren't ink. They're earned. The silver serpent tattoo that Lana carried wasn't decorative art or a symbol of rebellion. It was documentation of service in places that didn't appear on maps, proof of missions that officially never happened, evidence of sacrifices that would never be publicly acknowledged for 3 years. She'd hidden that mark beneath her hair, had let people assume she was just another mechanic with basic qualifications and limited ambitions. She'd accepted their dismissal, their jokes, their casual cruelty. Because sometimes the greatest service you can provide is remaining invisible, but invisibility has its limits when you've earned the right to wear that mark through trials that break most people before they begin, when you've made split-second decisions that save lives in hostile airspace, when you've sacrificed everything for missions that exist only in classified files. That kind of achievement doesn't fade just because politicians decide it's inconvenient. Lana's story reminds us that we live surrounded by hidden legends. The quiet woman working in the parts department might have extracted hostages from impossible situations. The unassuming man in the maintenance hangar might have flown rescue missions through enemy fire. The reserve person who avoids attention might have achievements that would humble the loudest braggarts. They don't display their accomplishments like trophies because true honor doesn't require constant validation. They don't demand recognition because they've learned that respect earned through demonstrated confidence is worth more than praise extracted through self-promotion. But when circumstances force their true nature into the light, when wind lifts hair to reveal hidden marks, when crisis demands capabilities that only they possess, when quiet competence is mistaken for incompetence until it can no longer be contained, the revelation transforms everything around them. The pilots at Redstone Army Base learned that courage often wears coveralls instead of flight suits, that the most accomplished warriors are frequently the ones who've learned that humility is a luxury that legends can afford, that some people carry their achievements like hidden tattoos visible only to those who understand what they represent. Lana Briggs walked onto that flight line as a maintenance worker and left as an instructor, not because she demanded recognition, but because circumstances forced the truth of who she was into daylight where it couldn't be ignored, she carried her tattoo not as proof of what she'd accomplished, but as evidence of what she'd lost and found again. In the space between mockery and respect, the mark meant everything and nothing. A piece of art that represented trials no one else could understand, missions no one else had flown, and achievements that would never appear in official histories. True warriors serve in silence, but when silence is broken, when hidden marks are revealed, when legends emerge from the shadows where they've been waiting patiently, the world remembers that honor never really disappears. It just waits for the right wind to lift the hair and show everyone what was always there. Subscribe Ironheart Stories if you believe quiet legacies still carry weight, marked not just on skin but on history itself.